Welcome. This is Medicine with Dr. Moran. I'm Dr. Keith Moran. Thanks for joining me today. Many of my patients think that they're in good health, but in reality, many are not. I've made this video so that you can understand some of the factors that we look at in medicine that are markers of health. At the end of the video, you will have the knowledge to assess whether you're healthy from a metabolic standpoint. Health can be defined in many different ways. I'm going to talk about a recent study which is often quoted. This was published at the end of 2018, which is part of the U.S. National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. The investigators looked at 6 different factors to decide if someone was healthy or not. They took 9,447 patients. All were older than 20 years of age. In order to have a normal metabolic health, a normal value was needed for all of those 6 factors. These 6 factors can easily be checked during an annual health examination, and thus it's easy for you to see how you compare. Obviously, there are more than just 6 factors that play into overall health. This obviously becomes relevant when patients get ill for different reasons. As a physician, we call these additional factors comorbidities, and they're relevant. This is often the reason when someone gets very ill why they survive or not. Obviously, the more comorbidities you have, the less chance you have of surviving. This is particularly relevant with the COVID-19 pandemic. The vast majority of people, about 95% who have died, have all had comorbidities. And trust me, you don't want comorbidities. Many of these comorbidities, in fact, are preventable. This slide shows the 6 factors that we're going to look at. It includes waist circumference, glucose control, blood pressure, triglycerides, which are a type of fat, HDL cholesterol, which is often called the good kind of cholesterol, and lastly, the fact that patients were not taking any pharmaceutical medications. I will go over each factor so that you can see what's considered normal and what is considered abnormal. First of all, for waist circumference, to be considered normal here, for men you had to have a waist circumference of less than 102 centimeters or 41.3 inches, and for females less than 88 centimeters or less than 34.5 inches. Glucose was then measured. 2 measurements were taken. One was a fasting glucose after an 8-hour fast, which we typically do in the morning. In order to be considered normal, your fasting glucose had to be less than 5.6 millimole per liter, or in the imperial units, less than 100 milligram per deciliter. In addition, a blood test was done to see how much hemoglobin is bound to glucose. Red blood cells, which carry hemoglobin, have a lifespan of 3 months. So this test actually gives us a good idea of how much sugar or glucose is bound to the hemoglobin in the bloodstream over a 3-month period. We often call this test the hemoglobin A1C. The higher the glucose in the bloodstream, the more glucose will bind to the hemoglobin, and so a higher value is not a good value. A normal value for hemoglobin A1C is less than 5.7%. Next is blood pressure. The normal values for the systolic was less than 120 and for the diastolic less than 80. For the blood pressure, 3 readings were taken 5 minutes apart after all patients were resting quietly in a seated position. The first reading was not counted and the second and third readings were averaged. This is typically what we do in medical studies, and if you measure your blood pressure at home, this would be a reasonable way to do it. For further information on blood pressure monitoring, I do have a video on preparing for your doctor's visit if you have high blood pressure. The next factor is triglycerides. You can see the normal values here on this slide. Now HDL cholesterol. The normal values are listed again. The next factor is medications. To be considered healthy, you had to be on no pharmaceutical medications. Now lastly, I want to show the results of the study. As you can see, only 12% of patients had normal values in all 6 factors and would be considered to be metabolically healthy. Said in the opposite way, 88% of patients were deemed unhealthy. Of importance is that even in people with a normal body mass index, which is the ratio of weight to height squared, about 30% of people with this were actually unhealthy. So just looking at somebody who has a normal weight to height ratio does not necessarily mean that they're going to be healthy. Now, this is something that has to change not just in America, but in other countries around the world. There are obviously other factors that could have been added into the mix in the study, which would have reduced the 12% number even lower. Current smoking, for example, exercise amount, sleep, other illnesses would be some of the factors to consider in terms of someone's general health. It is easy for you to get values for your tests and measure your waist circumference to see whether in fact you are healthy. I encourage people to do so. Improving these factors with an appropriate diet and other interventions is important and will be the subject of other videos. These factors, of course, are worth reflecting upon if you find that your values are in the unhealthy range. Striving to improve these will improve the quality and quantity of your life. I hope you found my video to be informative today. If you did, please click like. I'm Dr. Keith Moran, and you've watched Medicine with Dr. Moran. Get healthy and stay healthy.